Let's open in a word of prayer. Lord, thank you very much for our time together, and uh, pray that you'll always keep us to remember that we are people of hope and not to be we are to be people of hope and not people of fear, even though the times we live in seem to be pretty difficult. So bless our time together today in Jesus' name, amen. Well, today I'm going to title this Millstone Time. I'm also going to, I always say I'm going to try to keep it to a reasonable length, but I've got my great nieces here, and I get to go have lunch with them if I get out of here early enough. And they're not really on the same, they're on their own schedule. They're three, and they decide, and it's pretty much that's it. It's amazing, the parents show up with the kids, and it's my wife's sister had triplets, and they came out to visit us when we lived in Indianapolis. It was about a 5-hour drive from where they lived, and so they put the kids in their car seats. They were 5 months old, and get there, and we started unloading the car, and then there was like this little bag about this big. That was mom and dad's stuff. The car was jam packed full of the little kids' stuff. So it's always kind of interesting. So here's some channels that we're on. So we're, as I said, Millstone Time, and we do have the app, and you can give us feedback on that. We are paying attention to that. We live at this time where things are accelerating very quickly. I like this 3D thing of a piece of music. I think it'd be great if it was a 3D score of something great. And so this is going to be like, you're the 1812 Overture. This is how this thing is all going to unfold, because, it's kind of nice and floating and everything at the beginning. And then the whole orchestra converges, and there's cannons and everything, and all this stuff is happening at the same time. And I think this is how the end times are going to play out. So we talk about acceleration, convergence, logistics, understanding, and about the fact that, as we get closer to the time, it does say in Scripture that the wise will understand and instruct the many. So I want to address one thing first. I'm going to read Daniel chapter 7. I'll read Daniel chapter 7, and then I'm going to address something that's sort of on my heart that's not necessarily, it is prophecy related, actually. So Daniel chapter 7 sort of lays out a vision, that one of the visions that Daniel has, and I'll just kind of jump in the middle of this in verse 17, where it's talking about these great beasts, which are four kings, which shall rise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron and his nails of brass, which devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with his feet. Of the 10 horns that came up, of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. This is describing the Antichrist. I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High. So it doesn't say that he prevailed completely against the saints. He was hammering them until the Most High shows up. Until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. So what we see is this last kingdom is going to get everything, is going to come under the control of this final beast. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise. And you can compare some passages in Revelation that talk about these kingdoms. And there they use the term mountains. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall rise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. That's probably 1 year, 2 years, and a half a year. So 1 year plus 2 years is 3, plus a half is 3.5 years. That's the period where he has this control. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and to destroy it unto the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominion shall serve and obey him. Here the two is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations troubled me, and my countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart. And so here's a representation of this beast and the horns and the little horn. So that's just one person's representation. And you can find these great works of art and people trying to represent this on the internet. And so we talk about this is that, one of the things that's going to happen is that before the beast comes, there's going to be I think a foreshadow. You're going to be seeing things come together. So if people are paying attention and they understand Bible prophecy, they'll have a clue of that. It's similar to what happens on with the horsemen. When the foreshadows come, they're kind of blurry and you're not sure. And this is one of those great things about, there's a lot of debate about this. And I get a lot of things from people. Somebody sent me this. I thought this was kind of an interesting, this could be a debate over timing of certain events in Bible prophecy or anything like this. This is kind of inaccurate. This is sort of how it goes. This is your typical discussion at a prophecy conference or email back and forth about, so you'll see it's sort of a little dance and a little boxing and everybody gets along and then we go to lunch. So that's pretty good. But all kidding aside, so this is sort of how a horseman would look, the foreshadow, and it gets clearer and clearer. So, but there's a debate. Are the horsemen riding? Are they mounting up? They've been riding ever since the beginning of the church age. But this is just, and we'll know. Well, eventually we'll have to sit down and we'll have to say, this is that which was prophesied by the prophets. And I want to address one thing. So I get a lot of email, probably about 1,000 emails a day. And some of it's just junk, everybody gets, but a lot of it are people writing to me. They have questions. They have advice for me, criticism, praise. I mean, it runs the gamut. And I think what concerns me is that it's not so much that there's disagreement about Bible prophecy, but there's confusion being put out there by teachers, people who call themselves teachers. They have YouTube channels, they have blogs and that type of thing, who are really spreading false doctrine, and they're confusing people. So one of the earliest heresies in the church was the heresy that, and it rose out of a form of Gnosticism and that the body was evil, that the flesh was evil. So therefore Jesus could not have come in the flesh. And so that what the disciples and people saw at the early time was really sort of a phantom, a vision of Jesus. Now he may return physically at the end of the age, they say, but when he first came, he was not real. And I had somebody send me some teachings this week, and I looked at them, and it was very troubling because I know people are trying to find out the truth, but they run into these people. And I guess I would say, I don't think YouTube views are an indication of how good you are or how true you are. But if somebody's been on the internet for 5, 6, 7, 8 years and their videos have like 20 views, it's probably an indication that they're probably not a good person to be following. So this person sent me this, and the person was very sincere, but I had to push back on this because this is one of the earliest heresies, that Jesus was not real. And I watched a little bit of this one teacher, and he was saying that, well, the Gospels were kind of okay, but they're not historically accurate. But then the epistles, they were all over the place, and you just really can't believe any of the epistles. Now, the answer to this heresy about Jesus not being real and physical is in 1 John. And it's really one of my favorite passages, so I'll just read it. 1 John chapter 1. So John, and you can tell by the way that John deals with this, is that this was a heresy that was going around when he was there. So he's still alive. He saw Jesus. He was at the cross. He was in the upper room for the Last Supper. He, was the disciple that Jesus loved. And he was there from the beginning. So he addresses this in his epistle. And I'm going to guess, speculation is that he was the bishop in charge of the church at Ephesus. He cared for Mary. There's a church tradition that that's where she's buried, in Ephesus. And so he addressed it. And this is 1 John chapter 1, verse 1. That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon, and our hands have handled concerning the word of life. The life was manifested, and we have seen and bear witness and declare to you that eternal life which was with the Father and was manifested to us. That which we have seen and heard, we declare to you, that you may also have fellowship with us, and truly our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. And these things we write to you, that your joy may be full. So when somebody says Jesus wasn't real, they're calling the Apostle John a liar. And it was interesting that this teacher that they were referring to me wrote a book about Revelation, which was written by the Apostle John. So that's true, but this testimony isn't. It's just, folks, you got to be really careful who you listen to. It's troubling. So I want to look at some of the things. So when we read that passage in Daniel chapter 7, we see that this beast comes and he takes over the whole earth. And it's going to be on a number of different levels. It's going to be economic, it's going to be cultural, it's going to be geopolitical. So, and then we also know that there's a lot of prophecies about Israel and the relation of the countries around it as we get closer to the end. So I'm just going to sort of pull out some things in the news. And I'm not saying that, wow, this is a fulfillment, the actual fulfillment of Bible prophecy. What I'm telling you is I believe we live in this period where the shadows of what's going to be are starting to come into focus. And we can debate how close those are. So let's just look at some of these things. So we live at a time where it's lawless. So they put a petition in for this LA District Attorney, Gascon, who's a Soros-funded prosecutor. And he puts people out on bail. We saw another example of this, a Soros-funded prosecutor in New York this week, where a guy goes up and he just almost kills a guy with a punch. I don't know if it was in a store or the subway or someplace. He just smashes this guy. The guy's arrested and charged with second-degree murder. And within hours, the charge is reduced to a misdemeanor, and he's released without bail. And this is not, and people are understanding this, and for example, I don't understand why the one party that I favor doesn't run around and just talk about this all the time. And who cares if people get offended about it? Just because this is really serious stuff. I mean, I saw a chart, I don't have it, that showed the business activity in cities across the country and how it has recovered, comparing today to what it was in 2019. And of the large cities in the country, the best one was Columbus, Ohio, 112% of what it was in 2019. But San Francisco, 36%. Chicago, 41%. So if we live here in Columbus and things seem kind of normal, but we sort of live in, it appears to be a bit of a bubble. And I don't think there was any other large city in the country that was above 100% other than Columbus. And then when you get to the medium cities like Cleveland, well, Pittsburgh was 46%, 42%. Cleveland was 36%. Chicago, 41%. I mean, the numbers are just unbelievable. Philadelphia, 40% of what it was in 2019. Now, Washington, D.C. is doing okay, and you kind of hope, well, maybe if they just went to zero, everything would be better, but we should not have so much. But this guy's, he runs for office, he gets elected, and he had destroyed San Francisco. He's probably one of the reasons why San Francisco's recovery is 36% today of what it was in 2019, where they have all the money and everything, and the homeless problems and everything. So he went down to LA and got elected. People signed a petition to recall him. They needed 700,000. They submitted about 770,000. And lo and behold, when they went to the election people, because they're all about election integrity because their guy is going to get axed. They rejected about 30% of the signatures. So guess what? The petition was rejected, and this guy's going to stay in office. They can try another petition, I guess. But, and they've done things like they don't have victims come to parole hearings, or people trying to get released on parole. The prosecutors won't show up. They won't tell the victims. It's awful. The guy's a complete legal terrorist. I don't know how else to describe it. And this is happening in St. Louis. In fact, if you look at the cities where it hasn't recovered, the cities where business activity has not recovered are cities that have these Soros-funded prosecutors. And it's, oh, by the way, in the 2020 election, when they had all the mail-in ballots and that type of thing, the same Board of Elections, they rejected less than 1% of the ballots in that case. Oh, okay, got it. So this transgender thing, I'll talk a little bit about this. California has now enacted they will not allow any of their state-funded sports teams, like UCLA and USC, to travel to Georgia for sporting events or anything, because Georgia enacted a law that says if you're a male, you play on the male team if you're born a male. And if you're born female, then you play on female teams. And I suppose if you're female, you could try to make the male team. But and by the way, the NCAA came out and nominated this swimmer from the University of Pennsylvania as Woman of the Year, even though the other swimmer said that when she walks around the locker room, you can see all the male junk that this person has, because that's still there. But it's okay because it's ridiculous. But very few people will speak out because it's very intimidating. So in California now, of course, we've got to protect this. The abortion law got struck down, and Massachusetts came in and they enacted an act expanding protections for reproductive and gender-affirming care. So they're saying, we're not going to abide by what any other state does, and you can come here and we'll take care of you. And that law passed. There were 11 negative votes on the law in the House of Representatives in the state of Massachusetts. I think there were 7 Republicans and 4 Democrats out of a couple hundred representatives. So the law, so understand that the abortion fight's only starting. Okay, time to end the celebration over overturning Roe versus Wade and the Casey cases, and move on because there's work to be done. And this is it. So, and look at what they say in Massachusetts: access to reproductive healthcare services and gender-affirming healthcare services is a right secured by the Constitution and laws of the Commonwealth. Interference with this right, whether or not under the color of law, is against public policy of the Commonwealth. Speaking of Massachusetts, Boston Children's Hospital was tied up in a big controversy this week. Libs of TikTok and other people, Matt Walsh and some others, were tweeting videos of doctors from Boston Children's Hospital. And there was an outrage. People protested it. They called up the hospital and complained about what they were saying. Now, I'm not for violence or threatening violence or anything like that. But these people, I have to tell you, they're crazy. These are doctors. I mean, the medical profession is largely, at certain echelons, is totally corrupt now. Heather McDonald has a new book out about that, if you want to look that up, and she writes at City Journal. So here's one doctor talking about, so the controversy was, are they doing these things on underage children? And Boston Children goes, oh, we would never do it on underage children. No, they have to be over 18 to do this. Now, I'm going to play you two videos. The first is a mutilator. And you know what? I don't care if they're over 18. That's the other point. This is, when I read the Bible and it says that in the last days it shall be as in the days of Lot. And I look at what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah, I'm thinking I don't know if this was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. So maybe even Lot wasn't dealing with it. So we may be on some of the days of Lot stuff. So here's a doctor talking about transitioning a female. Do we have sound, guys?
So most of the patients that we have in
okay, so that one might not work. So essentially what this doctor says is, take out the uterus, sometimes the fallopian tubes, sometimes not the fallopian tubes. And the way she says it is just in this sort of, do you understand what you're doing? That's what I want to ask her. Do you know what you're doing to these people? Do you really understand it? But listen, in a state where it says you can get abortion up to the time of birth, what do you expect to happen? I mean, I know that's a slippery slope argument, but it really works because everywhere I look, the slippery slope argument works. So here's another one who's talking about, well, when do children understand that they're not the sex that they were assigned at birth?
So most of the patients that we have in the GEMS clinic actually know their gender, usually around the age of puberty, but a good portion of children do know as early as seemingly from the womb, and they will usually express their gender identity as very young children, some as soon as they can talk. They might say phrases such as I'm a girl, or I'm a boy, or I'm going to be a woman, or I'm going to be a mom. Kids know very, very early. So in the GEMS clinic, we see a variety of young children all the way down to ages 2 and 3, and usually up to the ages of 9. When they come into the clinic, they'll see one of our psychologists, and we'll be talking to them about their gender. We'll be talking to their family about how to best support that child and how to make sure that that child has the space and support to explore their gender and do well throughout their development. And we'll be answering any parent questions. A lot of parents do have questions, and so we answer those questions. The biggest piece of advice I give parents who are coming through the gender clinic at Boston Children's Hospital is to just be supportive. Sometimes you might not understand. Sometimes you feel like you don't know the terms or you don't kind of get exactly what the child means when they say that they might be this gender. But the biggest thing you can do is just love your child and support them and just allow them to express themselves. That's the biggest protector as well against negative mental health effects such as depression, suicidality, anxiety that we worry about for our gender diverse kids and young adults. So that support from a parent is one of the best protective factors and one of the best things they can do.
Now, if you saw her sitting at a Starbucks or something, you might think, this is a normal person. But you would be wrong, wouldn't you? And the thing is, just be supportive. Don't be anything else. And they talk about suicidality. I mean, the studies that they rely on this are horrible studies. They don't pass scientific muster or anything. So so Libs of TikTok had put some of the videos up. And so Boston Children's Hospital goes to the internet and they have this gender clinic, whatever they have at the hospital. And it's a well-respected hospital. So they put these things on the internet. And then Libs of TikTok or somebody else comes along and links to it. And so what do? Well, they punish the people who put up the video because people are going to have a reaction to it. And listen, this is by design because this is designed to get everybody at everybody else's throat. I have a video on that in just a moment. So here's Christopher Rufo. I highly recommend that you follow him, ChristopherRufo.com, Real Christopher Rufo on Twitter. When he's not, being banned or shadow banned, you have to go looking for him. But he has an article up. This is one that was done back in August 10th. Soldiers for the Gender Revolution. Left-wing activists have smuggled radical gender theory into more than 4,000 schools in the United States. Now, calculate that, 4,000 schools. I know this is happening locally. I talked to teachers from school districts around the Columbus area, and they're dealing with this. And the problem is nobody said it. There's a great risk to saying anything about it. You're shunned, and you could get fired. And the videos that so Libs of TikTok, they were permanently banned from Facebook for reposting a video that the Boston Children's Hospital had on its website. Well, because, people reacted badly to it. Well, they have it on their website. And this is one of those things. Okay, so the kangaroo fight, that was kind of nice, okay? This is really serious stuff that people have to fight. And you got to so they have this thing here, the Gay Straight Alliance, it used to be called. Now they've changed their name to the GSA Network. A little truth in advertising there because they were getting, people were looking them up. So if you want to find out, and Christopher Rufo, he does great. He downloads the documents, he puts them on his website. You can read through the stuff that they're doing. So one of the things they have is they have this 9-point platform for what they want to do in schools. We call for the right to self-determination and control of our destinies. We call for the abolition of the police, ICE, borders, and the judicial system. Now, you sort of get the impression from just the first two that they might be a little bit left-wing and a little bit woke and anti-capitalist. Number 3, we call for an end to disposability politics and a commitment to transformative justice. I bet they support this Gascon guy in LA. We call for the end of the cisgender heterosexual patriarchy. Okay, if you want to know, okay, so I would sort of be like the poster child for the cisgender patriarchal hierarchy. Okay, heterosexual hierarchy, patriarchy. I mean, I'm it. Okay, guilty. We call for decolonization and reparations for all indigenous and black peoples. How about the Christians that are persecuted and lose their jobs? No, they're not included. We call for comprehensive education that reflects our histories and needs. We call for an end to global white supremacy. We call for land justice and environmental justice. We invite our comrades, accomplices, and allies to join us. Unless you fall under number 4, you can't join. But this is what they're doing, and so this is another article that Christopher Rufo linked to, where they have these gender and sexuality clubs, but they don't tell the parents that their kids are in a gender and sexuality club. So, you need to be like all over. If your kid's going to public school, you got to be really careful. I don't know how you can not pull them out, but and you see here they creating and sustaining GSAs in elementary schools. That's the whole organization. The first rule of Rainbow Club is don't talk about Rainbow Club. Tell the kids, keep it a secret from your parents. Well, what's this doing? It's undermining parental authority. They even have a GSA advisor, GSA network, GSA advisor handbook. And you can go through and it'll tell you how to act and how to interact with parents. And it's like, don't really communicate with them where the parents might find the messages. You can go read this thing, download it. It's a PDF. Rufo has another article, Sacramento City Unified School District instructs teachers to normalize gender exploration and promotes such identities as genderqueer, polysexual, and two-spirit. This two-spirit thing is to bring in the American Native group, racial group, because they are two-spirit people. And so we're two-spirit people too. We might have this body, but we have this identity. In England, they got rid of this Tavistock gender clinic, and now there's word that 1,000 families are going to sue these people. And I hope they sue them into oblivion for what they did. They're doing, and there, so what, I don't care what Boston Children's Hospital says. In England, this clinic was doing like top surgeries and bottom surgeries to remove genitalia and create new genitalia on 12, 13, 14-year-olds and not getting consent of the parents. And you need to understand, there's a guy, a representative in California, who is all about, he introduces legislation all the time to either remove or reduce the age of consent to different things. His name is Weiner. I'm not making it up, okay? It's, and that's with a capital W. And he's from San Francisco. So go figure. But there's a lawsuit pending here in the United States where they're doing discovery and everything now. I think it might be in Florida or Orlando, where the school system, the kid actually had surgery without the parents' consent. Now, sometimes you think, well, parent consent, that's a good protection. But then I see parents taking their kids to psychologists like you saw at that one from Boston Children's. And how's that going to go? So look, this is what the Lord told us the end would be like. I can tell you, this did not happen. I graduated from high school 50 years ago, in June. This did not happen when I was in school. I do not remember a trans person ever. And I went to university. They had, LGBT clubs at public university and stuff. I don't remember any of this stuff. And it's a problem. This is an article from the Wall Street Journal yesterday or Friday talking about woke activism is flooding American classrooms. Just listen to this. I'll read a paragraph. The Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty has reviewed the required coursework for 14 programs for teachers to be in the Badger State. So we're talking about the state of Wisconsin. These programs produce about 80% of all teaching graduates in the state each year. What they found was shocking. Worldview building and ideological manipulation take precedence over teacher preparation. I'll repeat that. Worldview building and ideological manipulation take precedence over teacher preparation. And they'll look at a Christian college and say, well, you're just trying to manipulate their worldview. Well, you're doing it too. You're teaching them a religion. On the syllabi, noticeably lacking are academic literature or manuals of classroom instruction. Instead, Hollywood movies like Freedom Writers, popular books like Jonathan Kozol's Letters to a Young Teacher, and propaganda like Anti-Racist Baby abound. In place of academic essays, graduate students write personal poems or collect photographs. These kitschy activities infantilize what ought to be a rigorous pursuit of professional competency. The University of Wisconsin, River Falls, defines education as, quote, a social justice and change agent. The University of Wisconsin Stevens Point commits to anti-racism. Each program exhibits a philosophy of education called critical pedagogy, made popular by Brazilian Marxist Paulo Freire, that envisions schools as places not of academic instruction, but of societal change. And so listen, this is what's happening. This really started in earnest here in the United States back in the first Obama administration, continued during the second Obama administration, and it continues today in the third Obama administration, which I refer to lovingly as the Biden administration. And so there's this, it's like this war being set up between people. I mean, the things they do are outrageous. There's the search of Trump's estate down in Mar-a-Lago. And if you complain about it, I should have, I quote it because you would throw things at the screen if I played it. So I'll quote it. So I get up in the morning before my wife gets up and I watch MSNBC. And then she comes out and says, turn that off. She doesn't even say please a lot of times because it's angry. And I understand, okay? But, for me, I don't drink coffee. So that's like coffee. It gets enough adrenaline going to get through 2 a.m. So they have on Richard Haass, who's head of the Council on Foreign Relations. He's a globalist. And Joe Scarborough. And Joe says, even my friends that I thought were reasonable Republicans, they voted for Reagan and Bush. They're like outraged. They want to replace the government. They're talking about revolution. No, they want to vote in people that align with their ideology, Joe. Boy, Mika and Joe, I can't imagine what living in their house must be like. But Mika Brzezinski, his wife, who's also the co-host on this show. So he says, and they're just radical, they're extreme, they're extremists. And this is what's happened. If you don't agree with them, you're a terrorist. And this is the whole government narrative that I've been talking about. Where they took publications that related to Muslim terrorism and then just put in white supremacists and people that agree with us or people that challenge elections. Well, people that challenge elections, except for Stacey Abrams in Georgia, because it's okay for her to challenge elections all the time, which she does. So they've created this narrative. And then if parents go to school boards and complain about this stuff that's being shoved down their kids' throats, and maybe they get a little bit animated at the meeting and they yell at the microphone, or they do, remember that, I don't know if I didn't play the clip, the guy goes in there and he's complaining about it, and he starts to read from one of the books in the school library, and they said, "You're not allowed to read child pornography in public. It's in the school. Your employee put the book in the school." "Well, you can't read it. That's not right. We could have you charged with a crime." "You give it to my kids." Turn his mic off. And so this is this narrative that's built all the time. So Joe Scarborough, he gives this thing, and this is just terrible. I can't believe what's happening. Richard Haas, what do you think? And he says, "I think that, white supremacy, terrorism, and extremism in our country is a greater threat than Islamic terrorism and Russia." So here's Victor Davis Hanson. He's a voice of reason on Jesse Waters the other night with Pete Hegseth.
Tonight we got the right guy to break down where we are. Let's bring in Victor Davis Hanson, the senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. Victor, we immediately thought of you as the right guy to talk about when you see the way the left is talking about who we are as a nation, who their political opponents are, and now what they're willing to do about it. It's scary for people. Can we walk back from this type of precipice?
Yeah, I think we can, but remember, the left projects. So if Christopher Steele draws on sources like Dashchenko and Dolan, a Clinton operative, they draw on Russian sources to smear Donald Trump, and then they call it Trump collusion. Mm-hmm. So they're talking nonstop about civil war. They really are, and they do things that are revolutionary. I mean, nobody on the right said, let's junk the 233-year-old Electoral College, the 180-year-old filibuster, the 150-year-old 9-person Supreme Court. Nobody said, let's bring in 2 more states and end the idea for 60 years of a 50-state union. And then when you look what they've actually done, they failed at that, but nobody in the Republican Party ever tore up the State of the Union address on national TV like Nancy Pelosi. No Speaker of the House, not Newt Gingrich, not anybody else, Paul Ryan, they never said, you can't, to the minority party, you can't have these people on the committees. That was a revolutionary thing to do in the House. Nobody ever goes outside the homes of Justice Kagan, thank God, or Justice Sotomayor. There's not right-wing assassins that show up out there. And when you look at the literature that's coming out, if you look at the New Republic or The Nation, these left-wing venues, all you hear is blue exit, and it's time for succession, and we can't live with each other. Or if you read, Time Magazine, that classic article by Molly Ball in February of 2021, where she gushed, she was giddy, outlining what she called was a conspiracy to change radically the voting laws, to inject $400 or $500 million to alter the way we voted for centuries, so that 70% of the votes would not be cast on election day, even as the rejection rate would decline by a magnitude of 7 or 8 of the individual ballots. So these are revolutionary things they're doing. And the other thing is they never show any data. It's easy to say Trump is a fascist, or Trump did this, or these people are revolutionaries, or they want a civil war. But did Donald Trump ever try to weaponize the IRS in Lois Lerner fashion? Did he take the FBI and use it to go after Joe Biden's residence when he was president? Did they go into the DOJ and have this collusion hoax? Did any of these people who worked for Trump lie 4 times to a federal investigator like the FBI Director Andrew McCabe? So they are the revolutionaries, and they project it on to others. And what's the whole purpose of this, Pete? The whole purpose is on these agenda issues they're behind. And Joe Biden has an anemic rating, and they feel that if they can gin up a January 6th crisis, sort of a Reichstag fire, and they did it, remember in 2021 when they had barbed wire and 30,000 troops in Washington, D.C., and the greatest weaponization since the Civil War, or they can take the raid and just dribble things out. One week it'll be nuclear secrets. The next, Trump improperly took out mementos. The next, he was trying to get information on his enemies. And then the media goes to town with a bombshell, walls are closing in.
Yeah.
And otherwise we're not going to look at the issues. Inflation, the border, energy prices, crime, Afghanistan, foreign policy. Instead, it's always react to allegations that you're insurrectionists as they leak to the media.
And keep the projecting narrative continuing, because that continues the conversation exactly where they want it. We knew you'd be the right guy to talk about it. Victor, thank you so much.
So, I mean, I saw at the border, the Texas National Guard came, and there was a fence on a guy's property, so they locked the gate. And the federal border agents came and unlocked it and let like 80 people through, 76 of which were military-age males, by the way. That always, I mean, do you see many females in these buses and stuff? The whole thing is out of control. And they're trying to get these aliens registered to vote. That's part of the goal. And this all started with Obama. I mean, the guy just tore everything down. It started with his speech in Cairo at Al Azhar University on June 4th, 2009. Go look it up and listen to it. It started the Arab Spring. It was sort of like, okay, all you Muslim brother guys, now's the time. I'm just telling you, I'm glad I'm 68. That's all I can say. So here's, related to what Victor Davis Hanson and I see, I've already spent way too much time on this, but this is really important stuff. This is the New York Times the other day. An editorial by two professors from Harvard Law School. And I believe one of them is a professor of constitutional law. So when I was in law school, you would take a constitutional law course, and it would be about the United States Constitution, this great document. It's acted as a governing document for a government longer than any other document in history, probably. And he said, here's the title, "The Constitution is broken and should not be reclaimed." So they start off and they say, look, when the Supreme Court does something we don't like, we say, we got to get the Constitution back. And these guys are insurrectionists because they say, I don't care what the Constitution says. If it says Congress should be elected this way, we'll just put a law in, and I dare you to try to take it to the court and get it overturned. And at the end, they say this, by leaving democracy hostage to constraints that are harder to change than the rest of the legal order, constitutionalism of any sort demands extraordinary consensus for meaningful progress. It conditions democracy in which the majority rule always must matter most on surviving vetoes from the powerful minorities that invoke the constitutional past to obstruct a new future. This is Marxist, tear it down language. These are professors at Harvard. Americans could learn simply to do politics through ordinary statute rather than staging constant wars over who controls the heavy weaponry of constitutional law from the past. If legislators just passed rules and protected values majorities believe in, the distinction between higher law and everyday politics effectively disappears. One way to do this, to get this more democratic world, forget packing the court. This is in their article. One way to get a more democratic world is to pack the union with new states. Now, do you think they divide Texas into like 7 states? Actually, they probably could be done. So they could all have 2 senators, and the vast majority of them would be maybe conservative, except for, Dallas and Austin and some of those places. But we'll let them have a couple. We're not saying keep them out of Congress. It's just we don't want that many of them. We want to have more. But this is what they're doing. So they want to make D.C. a state. They want to make Puerto Rico a state, and they want to make more states. And so then what they'll do is they'll divide up New York City into 4 states. That way they get 8. I mean, this is this is what they talk about. More aggressively, Congress could simply pass a Congress Act reorganizing our legislature in ways that are more fairly representative of where people actually live and vote, and perhaps reducing the Senate to a mere council of revision. In so doing, Congress would be openly defying the Constitution. And for that reason, we would need to insulate the law from judicial review. So we would pass a law that says the courts aren't allowed to look at this statute. Fundamental values like racial equality or environmental justice would be protected not by law that stands apart from politics, but as they typically are, by ordinary expressions of popular will. And then they go on to talk about the Electoral College, which is part of the Constitution. Change the Constitution. And they say, no, we'll just legislate around it. And then we'll say the court can't do this. You think this isn't real? North Carolina. This is an article from Friday at Red State. North Carolina Supreme Court enacts a full-scale judicial coup. Now listen, this is prophetic. This is, Matthew 24. You'll be brought what? Before magistrates and judges. And you see a parallel here, by the way, between the United States and Israel. So, the United States versus Trump and the weaponization of the justice system against him is virtually identical to the weaponization of the justice system against Bibi Netanyahu to drive both of them from public life and throw them in jail. One of the cases against Bibi Netanyahu, this is just absolutely insane. Caroline Glick did a whole show on it this week. He bribed news organizations. They don't say really how, but the quid pro quo was he talked to them to get more favorable coverage. That's what every politician in the world has done since the beginning of time. And that's a bribe now. And so what they've done is they've now, and so they look at the media coverage, and what they did is they looked at the media coverage, who was supposedly getting more favorable coverage, and they said, well, it's a bribe because they weren't as mean to Netanyahu as they usually were. They were a little bit less mean. And that's a bribe. And this case has been going on for years. And now they're weaponizing the justice system there, just like here. So what did they do in North Carolina? Well, North Carolina, they've enacted some laws. I think they have a largely conservative majority. So they passed some laws. They redid the districts. And the North Carolina court is controlled by leftists. And they didn't like the redrawing of the districts. So what do they say now? Legislature, you can enact laws, but because you redrew the districts in a way that we don't like and we think is gerrymandering and racial and all this other stuff, none of the laws that you enact are valid. Do you understand how radical this is? That's North Carolina. Gavin Newsom, commonly referred to in California as Gavin Gruesome, would love this. They don't even do this in California yet. So, big problems everywhere. So, I mentioned this in my midweek update. I'll just reference it. Back in September 22, so this great reset thing that we talk about, where they're trying to take over everything, and we had these lockdowns, and now everybody's acting like, well, I don't know who did that, but it's not us, but you need to give us more power so we can handle, Charlie Vector things in the future a little bit better. But now they're coming out. I mean, this is from Project Syndicate, and they talk about the fact that if we think the climate's out of control, we'll just declare a public health emergency and lock everything down. Under a climate lockdown, governments would limit private vehicle use, ban consumption of red meat, and impose extreme energy-saving measures while fossil fuel companies would have to stop drilling. To avoid such a scenario, we must overhaul our economic structure and do capitalism differently. Okay? Addressing this triple crisis requires reorienting corporate governance, finance, policy, and energy systems toward a green economic transformation. This is that ESG stuff that I've been talking about, that Saudi Arabia pushes, that Russia pushes, that get our people to stop drilling and gas prices go up because you have to buy from there, the supply. And so Russia and Saudi Arabia are making tremendous amounts of money. I'll share a little bit about that in just a moment. Here's a document where they sort of lay this out. You can find this. I think I found it at the World Economic Forum. Time for a shared vision. You know, it's always a shared vision. Here's an article. I think this is from Wall Street Journal. Sri Lanka's farmers struggle to survive. So they put in this rule, no imported fertilizers, organic farming, yields dropped 40% over the year. They went, in that period of time, they went from a rice exporting country to a rice importing country. There are farmers that made a living selling crops. They cannot even, some of them have a couple, 1, 2, 3, 4 acres. They cannot grow enough food to feed their own family. Now, at some point, you have to say, this is deliberate. They're trying to take over everything. This is an article from a head cover from the European version of The Economist a couple weeks ago, Europe's coming winter peril. I mean, look at some of these things. An energy reckoning looms for the West. More smelters face the threat of closure. So you know what a smelter is? That's where they make like aluminum that they use to make cars and cans and that type of thing. They're closing them in Europe to save what? To save energy so people can have fuel, gas, and electricity to heat their homes this winter. So when The Economist puts up a cover like this, and you see the bear there with the red eyes and Little Red Riding Hood, that's Europe. And the lights are going, I mean, they're already turning the lights off in a lot of cities at night to save fuel. They're trying to fill up their gas reserves. So an energy reckoning looms for the West. Look at this from the Financial Times. What is not available anywhere are quick means for increasing the physical supply of energy. Yeah, when you shut down all those wells, you don't just say, okay, we're going to go drill all those wells, open those wells back up. That's not how it works. It takes time to shut them down. Probably takes longer to open them back up. This crisis is not an inadvertent consequence of the pandemic or Russia's brutal war against the Ukraine. And Financial Times is no conservative newspaper. It has much deeper roots in two structural problems. First, unpalatable as the reality for climate and ecological reasons, world economic growth still requires fossil fuel production. Hey, all these experts, you know what? I knew that. Everyone sitting here knew that. Fossil fuel, and I think it's probably misnamed. I don't know that there were that many dinosaurs. Probably a process from deep within the earth, but that's another topic. Without more investment and exploration, there is unlikely to be sufficient supply in the medium term to meet likely demand. Temperatures go down, people freeze, sometimes to death. I'm sorry. It's just a consequence of having to shift to this greener economy. The present gas crisis has its origin in the Chinese-driven surge in gas consumption during 2021. What's that about? Well, China's economy improved. People wanted cars. They wanted homes with electricity. We like electricity. It improved lives. Go live without it for 4 days. We've done that, and I'm glad to say the marriage survived, barely. After 2 days, until we got the hotel room with the air conditioning, then everything got better. Demand grew so rapidly that it was only available for European and Asian purchase at a very high prices. Meanwhile, respite from the rising oil prices this year has only materialized when the economic data from China is unpropitious. In the International Energy Agency's judgment, it is quite possible that global oil is always going to be in short supply. And here's Russia. well, here's more European smelters are expected to be shut because they use energy. But wait a minute. So I work at the aluminum plant and it's shut down. Well, my rent just went way up. My fuel bills have just gone way up. And they're going to go up even higher. They're already up like 4 times what they were a year ago. Just wait till winter hits in Europe. I mean, they don't know what to do. We haven't seen anything yet. I mean, and then Russia, they want to shut off the gas again. They shut down for maintenance the Nord Stream. And Germany's like, we don't know what to do. Maybe, and some people in Germany are saying, maybe we could get them to open Nord Stream 2. And they keep shutting it down. So they're going to shut it down for 10 days for maintenance. And this is a big supply. This is from Bloomberg. The UK will struggle to keep the lights on this winter. A colder than normal January could mean blackouts. Times of UK Times. Blackouts are on the way unless we act now, warn experts. A nightmare scenario if winter does its worst. So here's another one. Europe battles to keep people warm in energy crisis. Scholz backs a West European gas pipeline. They want to bring more gas from Algeria. So you don't build that overnight. It's going to take a couple of years to build it. What do you do in the meantime? So I think what you're going to see is you're going to see a resolution to this Ukraine war in the hopes that Russia will start selling gas to Europe again. But maybe he won't. He might be really ticked off today. Did you hear what happened in Moscow yesterday? One of the closest advisors to Vladimir Putin is a guy named Alexander Dugin. And he's been called Putin's brain by foreign policy or foreign affairs. He's been called Putin's Rasputin because he's an advisor and he's very mystical, but he's very big on Eurasia rising. And he was calling 14 years ago. I was reading this guy and he was calling, I don't know if it was exactly 14 years ago, but over the years that I've read him, starting around 2010, he started calling for the invasion of, guess what? Ukraine. Because that's Russian. And Russia needs to be restored to its former glory. And this is the guy they call Putin's brain. Well, yesterday in Moscow, a car bomb exploded and instantly killed his daughter. Some think it was intended for Dugin himself. So we talk about, what are the triggers for these things that happen in the end times? What was the trigger for World War I? The assassination of the Crown Prince and his wife from the Austro-Hungarian Empire in Sarajevo. That started a world war. Now we have a close advisor to Putin's daughter is blown up in a car bomb explosion yesterday in Moscow. So things are happening. We have drought everywhere. This is, I talked a little bit about this. There's these thing called the hunger stones in some of these places in rivers across Europe. And so they've had droughts in the past. And so they put up these stones and they engraved on the stones. And I mean, some of these were exposed back in 2018. So it's not the first time. But some of them have kind of these not so great messages like, well, here's this one person who tweeted, the recent droughts in Europe once again made visible the hunger stones in some Czech and German rivers. These stones were used to mark desperately low river levels that would forecast famines. This one in the Elbe River is from 1616 and says, if you see me, cry, or if you see me, weep. This is a lake in northern Italy. That's the rock exposed. That's usually underwater. And now we have this, talked about this, this is central bank digital currencies. They want to limit your carbon emissions. So you'll go to the store, programmable currencies, and I'll have some comments in my next update that I do. I may do one in the middle of the week again. from Yuval Harari talking about money and carbon emissions and central bank digital currencies, and this is coming, and it's coming. It's on the way. Some think it's going to be rolled out here in December. Now, I'm not sure about that, but they're working on it. Biden put in an executive order back in early March. And so so you'll go to the store and you'll say, Mr. Haller, where you're standing is a scale, and you gained 2 pounds this week. So put the chips back. Certainly put the dip back. And no red meat. I mean, you just breathing puts a lot of carbon and stuff into the air. So, you need to cut back on everything. So go home and sit in your chair and start doing yoga and meditating and that type of thing, because that you're just using too much. And it's already happening. They have this company put out a thing called the 2030 calculator. Here's that 2030 again. 2030 agenda, sustainable development goals, and now they call it the 2030 agenda. And if you look in the upper left-hand corner, you can just barely see where the clock is going from 2020 to 2030. This is the goal. I want all this to be in place. And what it is a calculator to calculate what you are spending, what kind of carbon footprint and the things that you're buying. It's a new service that radically simplifies the process of calculating a product's carbon footprint by eliminating all previous hurdles. And so they have a pretty slick website you can go and look at, and it's recommended by everybody. I don't know if this one, yeah, you see there's MasterCard down here, academic research partner. So they have all these people, and then they have this. So here's what, they have these slick little videos. And you go, you want to buy these sneakers, and you put in the size and the weight and everything. And so I tried a couple out. And after about 2 minutes, I'm like, I don't care. Okay, so I think there's a thing to it. So what they do is they put in this calculator that's so complicated and time consuming that you'll just give up and not buy the stuff, because it's less time out of your life. I just get by with what I have. But what does that do? That affects economic activity. So let's look at a couple things. Here's Russia, Ukraine. They have this nuclear plant. Macron is trying to go down there. People are saying Russia's going to blow it up. Russia's saying Ukraine's going to blow it up. It's going to put more radiation over Europe. It's going to shut things down. It's going to affect agriculture. So here's this article: Putin and Macron clear way for safety mission to the Ukrainian nuclear plant. Here comes Ukraine. Here's an article. This is in the Jerusalem Post, and I looked this up. This is kind of interesting because we know some of the judgments. It talks about one of the trumpet judgments, 1/3 of mankind dies. Right? Not a very pleasant thing to think about. But we live in a world where the death rate is already 100% from all causes. Think about it. I remember William F. Buckley. He was smoked, I think, and somebody said, Mr. Buckley, you need to stop smoking. You'll die of lung cancer, or you'll have a heart attack and die. And he goes, well, if I don't smoke, what am I going to die of? I mean, is it worse than a heart attack? Because I'm pretty sure I'm going to die, is what he was saying. But here it is. This is from today's Jerusalem Post. As risk of nuclear war grows, study warns that even a limited exchange would doom billions. And guess what they say in the article? So it's based on this study that was done at Rutgers. Nuclear war could cause a global famine and kill billions. And they have this paper that they published: Global Food Insecurity and Famine from Reduced Crop, Marine Fishery, and Livestock Production due to Climate Disruption from Nuclear War Suit Injection. Now, so they calculate this, and it's a limited exchange. And they have these pictures like North America, if you're red meat dependent or you have red meat in your diet, it's starving. You're starving. And Russia is starving. And the third world does a little bit better because of weather patterns and that type of thing. But guess how many people they say will die of the world's population? 1/3. Okay. And then here's another one. It says, even a small nuclear war threatens food security. This is another related article, research published August 15th. Nuclear weapons obliterates targets. The soot ejected into the stratosphere spreads, changing global weather patterns. When weapons are especially high yielding, the resultant soot could trigger global famines. And we have a drought. This is the Loire River in France. Also in a related Wall Street Journal article, drought devastates cotton harvests in the United States. So cotton prices are going up. Here's another picture of that river. Here's a picture in the UK and West Yorkshire. This bridge used to be under a reservoir. Now people are walking across it. Driest July on record sparks fear of European crop shortages. There are some places in Italy, they're saying 80% down in what they'll be able to harvest. Drained rivers squeeze Europe's economy. The Rhine River, big for barge traffic, is pretty much shut down because it's so low. And then, of course, the sanctions on Russia. Limited impact on Russian oil output and revenue. That's what we wanted to hear. So, and then the other thing, did you see Target? Target missed its earnings projection by 90%. Not 90% of what they projected. They were 90% below what they projected. Why? People aren't buying stuff. So you'll go to the store now and you'll see all this stuff and say, well, there's no supply chain problem. There's no problem. People can't afford to buy it. Rents are way up. And other countries too, like Australia, you're paying like $1,000 a month for a pod to sleep in. The whole thing, listen, I don't want to be, negative, but I'm just telling you that we live at a time where you got to pay attention. And you got to do stuff to help your family through it, because it could be very difficult. There was I don't know if I skipped over those. Well, here's Wall Street warnings. Norway has like the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. They lost $174 billion over the past few months. That's not good. That's not good. Jamie Dimon, J.P. Morgan Chase, he said, really, when you listen to what he said, this was a private call with investors, that it's like 60% chance that it's going to be really bad. There's a guy named Edward Rubini who used to be with Prudential. I actually talked to him a couple times in connection with a case years ago. He's sort of known around the industry as Dr. Doom. And if you go to Bloomberg, you can listen to his interview. He essentially says, if it's not a hard landing, it'll be out of control inflation for a very long time. Well, he's living up to his name, isn't he? And he called the recession he called the 2008, 2009 housing real estate crisis. So I hate to bring this news to you, but we also know that this is what could be the time that the Bible predicted. May not be, but it could be. So what's that? Why don't I end there? She wants to go to lunch. The twins, they want to eat, I know. probably gnawing on their arms back there in the nursery. Okay, I think I will. My director, you see her every now and then doing this, don't you? Like, you made the point, bring it in for a landing. So even when the lights are down, I can see her. I can feel it. I can feel the wind from the helicopter motion. So look, I'll just mention this. So this Hezbollah thing, Nasrallah gave another speech. Hezbollah is threatening war over the gas fields that we've talked about over and over again. This is significant. It's a crisis on Israel's northern border, and there's a fight going on, and they're doing it at the behest of Iran, because Iran's fighting on many levels. So go read Jonathan Spyer blog, Jonathan Spyer, SPYER.com, and he has a good article a couple days ago on the knife attack on Rushdie. And he says, listen, Iran is behind this. And it's insane for the world to try to enter into another agreement with them that's probably going to result in them getting, over a period of years, $1 trillion. Can you imagine what Iran would do with $1 trillion? None of it's good. And we're going to do this. This whole thing is just insane. So I'll do a midweek update. I'll talk about that. So listen, it is... be careful who you listen to online sometimes. I mean, I don't care if it's people who have different ideas about how things in Bible prophecy play out. And I've got some really great graphics. You want to see this update that's coming. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about really core theology, doctrinal issues. You got to be really careful. You got to guard your heart, because what Jesus warned in Matthew 24 about the time of the end, he 4 times. So he warned about wars and rumors of wars and famine and all this pestilence and all this, but 4 times more than he warned about anything else, he warned about deception. Take heed that no man deceive you, because the deception is going to be epic. Now, is that hard to believe? In a world where school teachers tell your female daughter that she's a guy and I'll support you in that, it's insanity. The deception, it's rampant. And they're always trying to create these narratives. So let's pray. Lord, thanks so much for your word. We pray that you will help us to stand strong in an evil time. Stand firm in the faith. Act like men, as Paul says in Romans chapter 16. Share the gospel with people. And don't be afraid to be, we help us not to be afraid or fearful about how people might react. Lord, you take care of that. You move the message into people's hearts in the way that you want, so that whatever happens will be to your glory. And pray that you will always help us to be acting in a way that would glorify you and your Son, Jesus Christ. We pray that you'll bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.